Okay, so hi Asha, thank you so much for connecting today and for agreeing to meet. I really, really appreciate it. I'm gonna pass the floor to you to introduce yourself to our public. So please.
Hi, Michela. My name is Ashor Sarupen. I am the Deputy Chairperson of the DA's Federal Council, and I'm the party's National Deputy Campaign Manager as well. I'm a Member of Parliament, and I serve on the Finance and Appropriations Committee, so I deal with the national budget, and I'm very aware of the first-hand of the fiscal crisis South Africa is in as well. So those are the roles I fulfill. In this election, of course, I fill a very senior role in the DA's election machine, as well as our policy machine.
Okay, awesome, thank you. So you're quite involved in our beautiful country, so thank you.
Yes.
So for today's episode, I've got two main questions. The first one being, if the DA wins the election, how can South Africans be sure that the country is going to firstly be in safe hands and it's not going to be exploited like it has been in these past 20 years, post-democracy years? Are there specific systems that will be put in place, or are there already systems in place?
Yeah, so I think when you look at South Africa's constitutional architecture, like most of what is written was written for a president like Nelson Mandela, someone who's conciliatory, who would not abuse power, and it places a lot of trust in the position of the president itself, rather than in parliament and in the institutions of the country. So while we've got a Judicial Services Commission, ultimately the president appoints judges, and those sorts of things. So there's lots of trust that was placed. And the framers of the Constitution never envisioned, for example, a Jacob Zuma who was fundamentally and systemically corrupt, although our institutions were strong enough to at least still hold him to account. But they certainly didn't picture a president who is as incapable of any action as Cyril Ramaphosa. That those two things were not catered for. So there's several things that have gone wrong in South Africa. First is accountability and oversight. The second is governance and governance architecture. And these things have led to mass scale corruption and failures of government to deliver. And each of these things need to be fixed. And what we are proposing fundamentally is that South African politics should not be driven by an individual or a president. But certainly governance shouldn't be dependent on individuals. It should be dependent on strong state institutions. You should have a strong prosecuting authority that is not, for example, at the whims of a president or a governing party to disband and destroy or to deploy cadres into. And I'll focus on that for a second as an example of what we would do. So in the late 90s and early 2000s, there was a special investigation and prosecuting unit in the government called the Scorpions. And they had huge success in fighting corruption, especially during the Mbeki era. And you saw things like a national police commissioner being charged with crimes. You'll never see that now. And the Scorpions was very, very effective. But the Scorpions then also uncovered, for example, corruption against Jacob Zuma. And in 2009, when Jacob Zuma was swept into office, one of the first things the ANC did through their parliamentary majority was to disband the Scorpions. And in its place came the Hawks, which has proven itself to be completely ineffectual at dealing with priority crimes and major cases of corruption and so on. So what we would do is create a body similar to how you have an electoral commission or a public broadcaster, so on, protected by the Constitution, like the public protector. It's a Chapter 9 institution in the Constitution. We create a new one that would handle senior and priority crimes, that would have the powers of the Scorpions, but would not be at the whims of a political party or parliamentary majority. And that would ensure, for example, that we got on top of issues relating to crime and corruption. A second reform that goes to the core of what has gone wrong in South Africa is the issue of cadre deployment. Now, what is cadre deployment? It has its genesis in the ANC's 1997 conference, where Thabo Mbeki was elected president in Mahikeng. And there they resolved that in every strategic part of the state and parts of the private sector, a senior ANC member must be deployed, because they believed in this idea of that the political party must have hegemony over every institution of state, and that every single part of South African society must report not to institutions and so on, but to the dominant political party, which at the time was the ANC. And so they've executed this policy of cadre deployment. And what it has done is made sure that people who are put into any position in government answer to the party. Their experience, their qualifications, their ability to do the job doesn't matter. All that matters is their loyalty to the party. And as a consequence of that, whichever is the dominant faction in the party. So during the Mbeki era, there were a whole lot of cadres who were deployed, and then they suddenly went off into big business and became very rich. When Jacob Zuma took over, he purged the Mbeki cadres and put in his own people who destroyed SAA, damaged SARS. We see the issues at Eskom with coal cartels. It's the genesis of the endemic corruption in South African society. Now, where the DA governs, we don't believe in cadre deployment. We don't care about party political affiliation. We don't care. What we care about in the civil service is, can you do your job? We believe in a free, independent civil service who's able to implement the policies of whichever party is in charge. So politicians actually should be coming to the electorate and saying, these are our policies and we will implement these policies. This is normal everywhere in the world, except in South Africa, because here politicians come and offer you, say, oh, well, we'll put these people into things and therefore magically things will get better. It doesn't work like that. The civil service must be independent enough that in every election of power changes, that same civil service, that's whether you're a street sweeper or a city manager or a director general of a government department, you should be able to look at the policies, the manifesto of the party elected, and say, this is how we're going to implement it, prepare an implementation plan, and so on. And they should be completely apolitical. So we would abolish cadre deployment through Parliament. We would make it law. We would amend the Public Service Act. We would make the Public Service Commission stronger and more independent, and far stronger than the Department of Public Service and Administration, in order to end cadre deployment, to professionalize the civil service, to make sure that any person employed in government to do a job is able to do that job. And we don't have things like deployment committees. One of the most pervasive things we've seen is the minutes of the ANC's deployment committee, which has been handed over to us by court order, which shows that for a period of 30 years now, a group of ANC officials sit down, assess all the CVs of people to be appointed to language boards, culture boards, heads, CEOs, or senior officials in state-owned companies, government departments, and based on their party affiliation, not their skills, not their qualification, they then tell the government effectively who to appoint, which is a perversion of what should be happening and why service delivery collapses, why state-owned companies collapse, and so on. And this isn't just at national, at every regional and local level, in provinces and municipalities, there are deployment committees. And so unless you're a member of the party, firstly, you've got no opportunity to be appointed in the state. You might be a very capable lawyer. You can never become the state law advisor because you're not a card-carrying, loyal cadre to the ANC movement. And these things are all the things that we're putting an end to. So professionalize the public service, strengthen the institutions, where necessary, create new constitutionally mandated institutions. And all of these things will put the country in safer hands, because if the DA gets into government and implements these things, even if we fail at our policies, you can be sure that we'll strengthen the institutions of state to the point where no political party will ever again be able to abuse the South African public or the machinery of state for their own ends. So that's the assurance that I can give you.
Great, thank you. Those are really, really extensive goals that I think definitely would make a positive difference in the country, without a doubt, because as you put it perfectly before, the last few years, the state has been destroyed and the systems in place have been destroyed and used badly, and also changed for personal gain. And now my final question and my next question would be that, what is the DA going to do to improve what I've identified as the main or the most three pressing issues in SA? Now, I would like to also just highlight that for this interview on YouTube and on the podcast link, I will put the DA's manifesto, because I know in there's obviously more details and very in-depth analysis and explanations of these points. But if you had to consider these three issues, which would be load shedding, the creation of jobs, which I do link to crime prevention, because I think creating more jobs goes hand in hand with preventing crime, and education. How is the DA going to combat these issues, or at least improve the crisis that the country is experiencing with these three issues in this moment?
Yeah, load shedding, I think, is a very important one to mention, because it has many, many knock-on effects. When load shedding started, I was 17 years old and now 35. So for my entire adult life, I've known nothing but load shedding. There are kids who are going to be turning 18 this year who would have known nothing but load shedding because they were born in 2007 when it started. It's actually quite perverse. So when you look at load shedding, there are a couple of things, and we can speak about, I can tell you about the corruption in Eskom, the coal cartels, the cadre deployment that I've just mentioned, the fact that criminal syndicates effectively have taken over the supply chains. And we could ruminate, and I told you how we would rebuild institutions and prosecute the criminals and all of those things. That's not going to, even if we did all of that, it's not going to add a single megawatt of electricity onto the grid. Or yes, it'll clean up the corruption and the theft and the looting, but it'll not add power to the grid. So we will do those things, but we also need to, it's not enough to clean up Eskom. Eskom is a lumbering old dinosaur built for a different era of an economy and a different time. It is also very pollutive and very expensive to run. Its fleet is aging, and it is not the future of energy. It's as simple as that. So there are a couple of things that we would do. Firstly, we would break Eskom up into 3 companies: transmission, distribution, and generation. Transmission is the long distance energy transfer. So basically electricity, most electricity is generated in the north of the country. In Mpumalanga, we import some from Mozambique, and so on. And then that electricity is through very heavy duty power lines transmitted to the rest of the country. And that transmission infrastructure is quite old, aging, and weak. So it needs its own focus. It needs some capital investments. And so that'll be its own company. Distribution is the local grids. Some municipalities run that. That's getting it from the bulk infrastructure to your home. So big substations and so on. So that's distribution. And that would be its own companies. Lots of municipalities run the grids, but Eskom has a big distribution network as well, and that needs to be its own company. So that's broken up. And then the third part of the value chain then would be, at least as far as Eskom is concerned, is generation. And what needs to happen, of course, is that we would look at creating a competitive energy generation market, bring in lots of independent power producers, private supply, open up the markets so that at scale, so that we're not dependent and reliant on a single provider who can at any moment switch the lights over. If Eskom fails, South Africa has no electricity. It's as simple as that. They provide 90% of our generating capacity right now. Bring in private competition, lots of independent power producers, lots of which would be green energy, new energy. That's the state of the world and where we're at. And the costs of renewables have come down quite substantially, particularly solar. And we started doing this at a local level already. So it's very easy for a politician to come here and say, oh, well, we'll do this and we'll do that. It never happens. We've in Parliament agitated and fought and argued and harassed and gone to court and done everything that we can. Maybe harass is a strong word, but legally, we've used every legal process that we can to get, at least at the municipal level, allow municipalities to procure electricity from private IPPs. And as a result of that, several DA-run municipalities, the city of Cape Town has gone to market saying, who is available? Well, the city will buy electricity directly from you, not from Eskom. Do you want to set up a power plant in Cape Town? Stellenbosch. In Ekurhuleni, when we were in government, only in government for a single year, and we didn't get everything right, but we did get 27 contracts signed with independent power producers. The first project, even though we've been voted out, these things are irrevocable. And so even though we've been voted out, an ANC EFF coalition now run Ekurhuleni rather badly, from next year, the first of those projects come on stream. Over time, where the DA governs, we will become load shedding free, and we can bring that nationally as well. So it's not just about this policy. I can give you a very real proof point that these things are actually happening, that we don't just go to Parliament and fight, we actually then go and implement. And that's what we started doing. But if we can do this nationally and get a competitive energy market, we'll have enough megawatts on the grid. And the reason why this is important is because it links to your second point, which is jobs. The South African economy cannot grow because if we grow at more than 2% per annum, we'll have a national energy blackout because there simply isn't enough electricity. Eskom cannot produce enough electricity. As I said, power stations are old and failing and lumbering, and they should have been decommissioned 10 or 20 years ago, and new power plants were never built. And the two that were then built, Medupi and Kusile, were over budget, with lots of corrupt subcontracts involved, and the generating units are still frequently going out and not brought on stream, and there's lots of construction issues with those, so they're never going to deliver the amount of energy we need. So you've got to bring in the private sector, and that's what we would do. So that would do that. Security of generating supply means that you'll be able to sell electricity again at a profit. And with that, you'll be able to invest in transmission and distribution infrastructure, which would stabilize the entire energy grid in the country and means that you have reliable, secure energy supply. And when you have that, Then factories that are currently not working for 2, 4, 8 hours a day because of electricity, mines that have to shut down, big firms that don't want to invest because you need 24-hour round-the-clock electricity, for example, to do major steel work or glass work because you need big smelters. All of that can come back on stream and can function again. And then the raised productivity, because every sector of the economy shuts down for 2, 4, 6, or 8 hours a day, depending on what stage of load shedding we're at. That raise in productivity, the fact that you'll be able to work from 8 to 5 every day, or factories will be able to work all their shifts, will begin to grow the economy and create the environment for jobs. And that would be an immediate boost to the economy. So energy supply is the first key thing to getting the economy moving again. And with this, and once you've got security of energy supply, you automatically become a more attractive destination for investment. Nobody's going to invest in a country that can't even provide electricity. No automotive manufacturer can say, we're going to double the size of our manufacturing plants and double the output of cars made in South Africa when they don't have certainty that they're going to have electricity. That's the first thing. The second thing is, if you look at what do major foreign institutions and where investors look at information on making decisions to invest in South Africa, what are the risks that are flagged? And if you look at IMF, credit ratings agencies, everywhere that you look, policy uncertainty is the second big thing that hinders job creation. So we have an unstable policy environment. Investors don't know if they're going to make a return on investment, because what's going to change? Is South Africa going to institute protectionism? We've seen this with some of the master plans. Are they going to protect certain companies and make sure that no other investor can be competitive? Are they going to expropriate land without compensation? These things all deter investments. And so we've got to give policy certainty. And that's what we would focus on secondly. It's making sure that there's the policies that the states are committed to are policies that they are committed to. And that would make South Africa a lot more attractive for investment as well, is sorting out the policy certainty situation. And again, let me use examples. The mining charter, it's now in its third version, I believe. The first version of the mining charter said, this is our BE requirements. This is how ownership must change. And the mining sector complied with that. And up until early 2000s, South Africa attracted 5% of all global mining exploration budgets. So lots of mining companies were all over the world, were exploring in South Africa, saying, this is a place we want to invest in. That has dropped, and South Africa now attracts less than 1% of all global mining exploration and investment worldwide, from 5%. It's a huge drop. So if you think about it, it's a 500% drop, more than a 500% drop in mining investment. And that's because under the Zuma era, the mining charter was changed twice. There was no certainty. Mine firms had been told, oh, well, if you did a BE deal, that's fine, but now you've got to do another one because those shares were sold and you've got to give more shares away and all sorts of things. And it's just this constant uncertainty of what must we do to just comply so we can dig a hole in the ground, take out the minerals, refine them, and sell them, and create a whole lot of jobs in the process. And that's killed the mining sector. And we used to be the largest producer of gold in the world. We used to be then, we dropped down second, third, fourth, fifth. We're no longer even in the top 10, for example, in gold production. So providing policy certainty would then attract the investment to create jobs. I know this doesn't sound sexy to a lot of voters, but this is what actually creates jobs. And then, of course, the third thing is labor legislation. South Africa's got this wonderful European set of labor laws that is designed to protect high-value labor. And as a result, we have lots of job vacancies for very skilled people. So we need engineers and doctors and accountants, and of course we do need them. But our labor laws are designed for a high-value economy. What we do have are 10 million unemployed people who, unfortunately, because of the legacy of apartheid, as well as the ANC's terrible education system, has left them with low skills. And instead of trying to create a labor system that absorbs lots of low-skilled labor into mining, manufacturing, and industrial work, where you have the opportunity to put people into low-skilled labor, we just use labor legislation to effectively create a services economy rather than a manufacturing economy. And so that's got to change as well in a meaningful way so that we can pull people into jobs. And the Labor Relations Act needs some fundamental reform. Now, nobody's saying scrap, for example, protections and occupational health and safety. There must be all of those things. You can't have people working in unsafe working environments. Nobody's saying reduce it to an era of slave wages or anything like that. But you've got to make it easier to hire and fire. Right now, there are people with degrees working as secretaries because nobody's going to take a chance in knowing that it's virtually impossible to fire someone. Nobody's going to take a chance in hiring a matriculant, which really is all you need to be a good secretary, some computer skills, good at note-taking minutes, and so on. That can be your first job. Instead, we want people with degrees, and we'll pay them a whole lot more, but we will rather do that because, if you hire someone, you're stuck with them, and then you leave lots of people who are first-time job seekers out of the economy, and we're saying the only way to get a job is with a degree. Most countries, and everywhere in the world, you do not need a degree to find a job. And we shouldn't be looking at using the tertiary education system just to make people entry-level employable. So there needs to be a lot of reforms on hiring and firing of workers, making it easier to hire and fire so that we don't disincentivize the employment of unskilled workers, which then would attract, again, investment at the bottom of the economic pyramid so that lots of low-skilled workers can get in, and so that people can actually find their first jobs and get people who have been long-term unemployed can get absorbed into decent jobs. And most South Africans who are trapped in poverty, I think, would much rather prefer to earn 7,000 Rand a month than a 350 Rand grant, the SRD grant, that they can barely afford to buy airtime, let alone milk and bread every week. And so we can, if we get it right, pull people into that. So that's how we deal with jobs. And then you're right, jobs then leads to less crime, less dependency on grants, less dependency on public services and public welfare. People able to afford their own homes would reduce the housing waiting list. But crime, even if we solve the jobs problem, we'll solve part of the crime problem. But the other part of the crime problem is the fact that policing in South Africa is run at a highly centralized level with very poor crime intelligence as a result. There's a single national police commissioner. They've got 9 provincial police commissioners. Decisions are taken at the center. So police needs to be decentralized. In the Western Cape, we have much frustration because we don't control police. It's a national function. And the National Police Commissioner decides, for example, the police to population ratio. And in the townships of the Western Cape, we've got some of the worst police to population ratios in the world. So we would decentralize the management of police to competent provincial and local governments so that they can decide, okay, these are the crime hotspots, we need to deploy more police there. If the sort of crimes in the Western Cape with drugs are, for example, different to a lot of financial crimes that happen in Gauteng, and we'd be able to specialize. We would also introduce specialized units. These were disbanded in the 90s, but specialized unit for rural safety, a specialized unit for drugs, so that a police officer, an investigator, doesn't have a stack of files in his desks that, one is a domestic abuse case, another's a drug case, another's a murder, another's it's something else, another's financial crimes, another is fraud, and not knowing what to do. If you have specialized units, then police can specialize, detectives and investigators can specialize and build up a crime intelligence network that begin to combat those crimes as well. Even if we sorted out the unemployment problem, for example, drug trafficking will always be there unless you've got criminal intelligence and a specialized unit that works. So that's what we would do in crime. And then you asked about education. And education is an interesting one because The Economist wrote an article that I encourage everyone watching this to look up. And from a couple of years ago, it says South Africa has the world's worst education system. Now, that's quite a headline, but it's not too far from the truth. And it notes how we have a couple of problems. The first is that even though our spending on education is actually pretty high, it's not a resource problem. It is a quality problem in the system itself. So what we see, for example, is we have huge problems with, after 7 years of schooling, not enough people can read, write, and do basic arithmetic. And that's in international tests and benchmarks, and it is a problem that needs to be rectified. So the first couple of years of schooling is absolutely critical, and we would focus on getting that right. And then you've got problems with SADTU and the major teachers union that is aligned to the ANC and effectively becomes, during an election campaign, the ANC's campaign machine. They'll abandon their classrooms and go knocking door to door to campaign for the ANC. And all of these things become problems. So we would make sure that the teachers themselves can pass the tests that their learners need to pass. And I know that sounds simple, and some people might think that's flippant, but there have been studies and tests done that shows that, for example, in mathematics, teachers are expected to teach things that their learners, that they themselves can't pass. If you can't pass a test yourself, how are you going to do this? So we would do all these institutional interventions. Now, the unions like to say, oh, that the DA is going to target and fire teachers. It's not true. We are going to make sure that the teachers can teach the content, reskill and upskill where necessary, and make sure that this does work. We would reintroduce teaching inspectors and make sure that the system itself does work. And it's not a resource issue, it's a management issue. And we'd also take back administrative control. In 2017, the Department of Education commissioned a report called the Volmink Report, run by Professor Volmink at the University of the Western Cape, I think he is. It could be at Stellenbosch, I'll have to double check that. But the report is available online. And what they found was that in 6 of 9 provinces, the majority union had taken control over the education departments. And this means that teachers are not appointed based on their qualifications or whether they've completed teaching colleges, but whether the union says so. Promotions don't happen based on competence or skill. Heads of departments, even administrative positions, they're dictated to by the unions. The unions should exist to stand up for the rights of their members, not to administer and control education. And the recommendations of the report were never executed, which is its own problem as well. So there's lots that needs to be done in education, but it's all management-based, not resource-based. So I hope I've answered your questions there.
You have, and really beautifully. So thank you. Very, very extensively, lots of information. So thank you very, very much. And just an extra quick question, just for interest, because I know this is a hot topic at the moment in South Africa. With regards to this new possible NHR bill, what would the DA do with this? And like how would it be treated or handled?
Yeah, look, NHI it's not only is it unaffordable, but it is the worst possible model for South Africa. So universal healthcare is important, and South Africa does have universal healthcare. So if you are ill or injured or whatever, you can go to a public hospital and you, in theory, should receive treatments. There are 25% of South Africans in medical aids who use the private system, 75% in the public system. The reason, again, that the public system is failing is not because of a lack of investment, resources, poor management. What the NHI will do is just transfer all of the problems from the public sector into the private sector and effectively abolish the private sector. It's not going to achieve anything. You're not going to raise the levels of public hospitals to the levels of private hospitals. You're just going to destroy private hospitals and private healthcare and take away people's rights to visit their doctors and so on. And many, many poor South Africans actually have opted out of the public system. They'll rather scrimp and save and go and pay 350 or 400 rand to go and see a private doctor than take their chances with a government institution where you go for Panado and you get your legs chopped off. I mean, it's the things that happen are heinous, and I'm not exaggerating. The government departments rack up millions of rands in medical legal claims because of malpractice. So we would scrap the NHI, and we would instead focus on reforming the public health system to operate at peak capacity. Now, there's nothing wrong with a government saying we cannot provide certain functions. KwaZulu-Natal only has one oncologist in the entire province. The state can still contract the private sector. You don't need to abolish the private sector or abolish medical aids or the rights of people to fund their own healthcare needs to say, well, we're going to contract private health. And we would look at a model that allows the state to contract surplus capacity in the private sector without taking away anyone's rights, anyone's medical aid. And that would be a far better model. While also, again, it's not an issue of resources. We spend a tremendous amount on health. If you look at the 9 provinces, it's where healthcare is really delivered. The 2 biggest line items in the budget are health and education. And per capita, we spend quite a lot on health and education. So again, it's not a resource problem. It is a management problem. And it is because of cater deployment and corruption and all those things. NHI is not going to fix that. So you've really got career politicians who will go and sort out tender corruption and fraud and management systems in public health, which we will do.
Perfect. Thank you. So I want to then thank you for these great points and these answers to these questions. And I hope everybody who listened today really learned something. I really appreciate you taking the time to speak with me and with the public. So thank you. And best of luck to the DA for these elections.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate it. Thanks for having me on.
Thank you.